morning, everyone. Welcome to Biz and Tax Matters with Mike and Dennis. I'm your host, Michael Davis. I'm a certified public accountant. My co-host is Dennis Markowitz.
Good morning, and I am an enrolled agent.
We both operate from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Today's special guest is David A. Braden, CPA, the Assistant to the Director of the Pennsylvania Bureau of Individual Taxes.
Hi, Dennis. Hi, Mike.
How you doing, David?
I'm doing well.
You're looking good.
Our mission is to inform our listeners every other week as to the various aspects of running a business, the tax code, and answer any questions they may have. So please call in your questions. We have a different phone number today, 908-268-4533, and we'll answer any questions you may have. Also, we're simulcast live today on video through PANJ YouTube page at panjtv.com. We'll monitor your comments and provide our feedback. If you're interested in any of our past shows, they're now on our website at bizandtaxmatters.com. And just so you know, if you're listening to our live show, today is Tuesday, May 28th, 2019. We also have an email address, which is bizandtaxmatters@mjdaviscpa.com. Our show will be available in podcast on panjradio.com, and will be replayed at 11 a.m. every day for the next week. So if you're not listening to our live Tuesday show, send us an email with your questions, and we'll answer it on our next show. Again, the email address is bizandtaxmatters@mjdaviscpa.com. Please note Biz and Tax Matters in the subject. And once again, our live call-in number today is 908-268-4533. In the past 2 weeks, I did get one question, Dennis, from someone. It is from David S. in Margate, New Jersey. He has a $50,000 loss on his Bitcoins that he's going to be selling, and he wants to know if he can offset it against his other income.
Well, that's interesting because everyone that I talk to makes a lot of money on Bitcoin, so his timing must not be very good.
Well, if I recall, last year at this time it was a lot higher than it is now.
Yes.
So that may be when
it's like the stock market. The timing is everything.
Oh, well, yes. Yes, buy low and sell high is the rule. Apparently, he did it the opposite way. But basically, he can only apply that against other capital gains.
Yes, $3,000 loss.
Correct.
He can claim, unless it's business.
Well, he can claim the $3,000 is the limit of the loss in excess of other gains.
Yes.
Okay, so if he has $50,000 of gains, he can apply the 50 against that.
Correct.
If he's got 40, he can only use 43,000 and carry the other 7 forward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct. But it would seem to me that with good tax planning, he could have circumvented that and used this loss by taking gains and then reinvesting the gains after 30 days.
Well, it sounds like you have a call coming in. Is there a caller there? Barely. Can you speak? Sorry, that's very low on the phone line today.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just calling about the townhouse you had for sale.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to call you back. We're doing a radio show. I apologize. I got your number. I'll call you back. Sorry about that, guys.
Personal call.
Yeah, I don't know who's calling. So,
but by the way, Rob, the portion when you sell the townhouse, the portion used for business, there is capital gains on.
Interesting. Okay, good to know.
Okay. Uh-huh. So just letting you know, being that you got the call.
Okay.
And anyway, back to the Bitcoins. So he can use the losses. He may not be able to use it in 1 year, but he'll be able to use it eventually.
Well, that's if it's a capital loss.
It's
for
a capital
investment.
loss. Well, Bitcoins are an investment. We actually just sat through a whole hour on that about a week ago. So. And that's it for the questions that we have. So right now we're going to get into the topic, which is Pennsylvania's top 10 requests for information and return adjustments based on notices that they have sent out. And our guest, as I said before, is David A. Braden, CPA, Assistant to the Director, Pennsylvania Bureau of Income Taxes. David, you there?
I'm still here, yes.
Okay, David's in Harrisburg today, so he's joining us by phone line. David, you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I've been a CPA since 1988. I'm a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. I went to school there for business economics with a concentration in accounting. At any other school, it probably would have been an accounting major, but Pitt Johnstown didn't offer that at the time. But I've been a CPA since 1988. I worked in a couple of public accounting firms in the Pittsburgh area when I first got out of school. I started working for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Treasury Department in 1990. Worked there for 14 years as an audit manager, special assistant to the deputy treasurer, and assistant deputy treasurer. I came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Revenue in 2004. Some of you may recall Tom Frisella worked for the Bureau of Individual Taxes at that time. I took Tom's place when he retired in June of 2004. I've been with Revenue now for about 15 years. I'm responsible in the Bureau of Individual Taxes for updating forms, speaking publicly for the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue, Bureau of Individual Taxes at fall tax seminars, doing webinars. I make a lot of policy decisions with respect to accountant questions on various tax matters for individual taxes. I do a lot of troubleshooting for accountants when they can't get items resolved through the normal channels, and speak publicly to lots of other different groups.
And I've heard you speak, as Dennis has on many occasions. In my opinion, you're extremely knowledgeable with what you do. And as you said, you've helped people with issues, reaching out. I've reached out to you a few times, including last week, where you helped me with an issue. And I want to thank you for that.
And I too want to thank you. You helped me last week too, and I've been working with you for years now, and you're quite good at what you do. You may not know all the answers, but you can direct us to someone who can assist us, and I want to thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate having somebody that can help us.
I try to provide good customer service, which is one of the Department of Revenue's priorities in our mission statement as well as our goals.
Well, they've always had some shortcomings. Unfortunately, a person in your position should have had experience in the Bureau for some time, because when you get someone new to it, they don't know everything, and experience is the best teacher.
Yes, there are a lot of new people in the Department of Revenue, yes.
There are a lot of new people in every government now.
Yes. But that being said, let's start on our topics. And if you're watching on the YouTube, we do have a slideshow that David put together for us. And we're going to start with the top 10 requests for information. And there are notices, and I'm going to put a notice up right on here. If you look at the notices, on the right-hand side of the notice, next to the tax year and the date, is where the code is that we're going to be discussing. The first code is code 902, which is a request for SP dependent verification documentation. And for those that don't know, Schedule SP is there for certain low income, although the way it's calculated, not necessarily low income people are able to get a credit against their individual taxes.
Correct.
And this is a request for dependents because the income level that is exempt is based on the number of dependents. David, when do you send? How often do you send these out? This is obviously the number one request. Why would you send these?
Actually, the number of requests this year, which is almost 16,500, and that was through April, about the last week of April, actually surprised me because we had a revision to our instructions last year to say that if you are a first-time filer of Schedule SP, the tax forgiveness schedule, and by the way, SP stands for Special Poverty Provisions. That's why it's called SP. That actually did, like I said, surprise me, mainly because of the change to our instructions, but that's when an individual or taxpayer files for the first time for Schedule SP, and we don't have any prior record of them filing, or we have a prior record and they added a couple of dependents or a dependent new this year, and we want to verify that dependent actually exists.
Okay.
And we're looking for documentation such as a birth certificate and a Social Security card to verify the dependent actually exists.
Okay. Well,
We don't want any dogs being reported.
and it was a good idea to update the instructions. Only most people don't read the instructions, especially those that do the returns on TurboTax. Unfortunately.
David, you mentioned that dogs are not allowed. What about cats?
No, cats aren't allowed either.
Thank you.
And Mike, you mentioned that unfortunately people don't read the instructions. And I'm going to pay homage to my dad here. My dad used to always say, if everything else fails, read the instructions.
That's correct. But
That's correct.
I have found human nature. Most people don't read. And for the exceptions who do read, don't comprehend.
Okay, I could buy that, but I think when people do something and they do a form, they go to the form, and if they can put all the information in, they do it, and they don't look at the instructions as to what they have to attach or anything like that. And that's what I've seen, which is the reason a lot of people get these notices. And I mentioned before that it's not always people at poverty level that qualify for SP because a lot of retirement income is not included in calculating the SP.
That is true.
So I have seen people that qualify with $100,000 worth of income
And pay no tax.
and pay no tax.
Correct.
So
They have interest in dividends, and if they're below 13,000 of total taxable income, and their eligibility income, other items don't exceed $13,000. Retirement income isn't included in eligibility income. They can qualify for 100% tax forgiveness.
correct. And I've had several clients that have qualified for that reason, retired individuals. So the next one is code 700, which are requests for 1099-Rs or W-2s. That would be because people are out of state? Would that be the reason?
Not necessarily. We have in our instructions a list of 9 specific times when a W-2 is required to be included with the return. Also, when taxpayers receive a 1099-R that has withholding on it, Pennsyylvania withholding on it, they're supposed to include those W-2s and or 1099s with their return.
Correct.
If you look down further, there are a couple of other codes, 701, and I think there's one on the next page, 887, that are similar to this particular code. And if you combine all 3 of those, actually, that is still the number 1 request for information. It's just they're broken down in various codes.
I gotcha.
On what's missing. Usually code 700 is when there's a 1099-R missing. 701 is just when the W-2 is missing, and then 887 is when there's a 1099 form that's missing.
Okay.
But all 3 of those could have Pennsyylvania withholding on them, and when there's Pennsyylvania withholding on it and they're missing, then they're basically all related to the same line 1 of the tax return and line 13 of the tax return.
David, would you say that a lot of self-preparers do not realize that the Commonwealth is not receiving a W-2 because they do their own e-filing, for example, TurboTax, in which the Bureau doesn't get a copy of the W-2, but just the amounts. And then when the W-2 withholding for Pennsyylvania doesn't agree with the flat rate, that's typically when they send out the notices.
That is correct. The Department of Revenue does have a W-2 database that we utilize, but early in the season, when we start reviewing returns, a lot of that information from employers is not readily available to the Bureau of Individual Taxes. So a lot of those notices go out early in the season because we haven't updated our database with every employer's information. So including a copy of the W-2 with the return is really needed there. And again, it's possible that it is those self-prepared returns, again, from TurboTax. I'm hopeful, though, that they would at least include that instruction to say that if you have a W-2 in these situations, the 9 situations, hey, you have to include a copy of the W-2 with the return.
Yeah, no.
The department doesn't review the logic in software vendors' programs. If we did that, we'd never get anything else done.
Well, yeah. I know the software that I use, which is UltraTax, if there's something that has to be attached to the Pennsyylvania return, it gives me a diagnostic that says to attach a PDF, and that way we'll send with the e-file.
Once again, it's who reads the diagnostics.
Yes.
I read the diagnostics.
You and I do.
At least, the critical ones and
Yes.
those, we clear out.
Yeah. But there is an easy fix, and I'm sure, David, you're going to go into it, about just faxing the W-2 on a DEX 93.
Yes, there is an easy fix with that. If they don't have the capability of scanning the document with the return and providing it with the return, they can send it with the DEX 93, which is our personal income tax fax or correspondence sheet. It provides telephone numbers directly on there where to send the information to. And if they get a notice, this particular notice, they could send it in via that fax, or they can send it in via email as well.
Right, but if they're emailing and scanning, I would recommend that they take the Social Security number information out.
Yes, that's great information, Mike. They should take out or at least redact it to the last 4 digits of the Social Security number.
Correct.
The EIN.
Correct. I had a client that got a notice that you and I discussed last week that we faxed over for that reason. Because it was easier to fax it than to scan it and then redact it and send it. So not only that, the fax gives you an acknowledgement that it was received.
If you use that feature.
If you use that feature. I just thought that was better in the situation I had last week. So, the next item is Code 909. Request for authorization to offset a refund on a joint return to a court order obligation or for separate returns. Would this be like in a divorce situation for child care or something like that?
Actually, no. This is something that is relatively new. A couple of years ago, the Department of Revenue was given the direction via a tax law change to say that if somebody owes any money to a court in Pennsylvania, this would not be for a situation where somebody's divorced and owes child support. This is if they have a court-ordered obligation that they have to pay to the particular court where they were tried, then if they file a return and there's a refund, we can offset that refund. We give them the opportunity first, if they filed a joint return, to separate the return into a married filed separate return for the husband and the spouse, or the taxpayer and the spouse, so that we only offset the person who has the court-ordered obligation, their refund. But if they don't do that, then we can take the tax refund and offset it to the court-ordered obligation.
Okay.
David, does this also apply to student loans, or is this a different section?
That's what I was just going to ask you.
That, I believe, is a different section.
Okay.
I don't know that we have an offset for student loans just yet.
Well, we're talking about student loans where there actually is a lien. A student loan where there actually is a lien out, which would have gone through a court at some point. That's what we were referring.
If there's a lien, the only way we would have that is if it's a tax lien.
Okay. Okay. Code 701 is specifically for W-2s.
Correct. And combining that with 700 is pretty much the same thing. We just need the W-2s because of those 9 particular reasons that are included in our instructions. The number one of those, by the way, is usually the fact that the taxpayer had additional withholding other than the normal rate of 3.07%.
Right, and then you require a letter from the employer.
Correct.
I had a client that we did that with for several years, and it was because he chose to do that instead of pay estimates.
Yes, that is one of the ways that many people do that.
So we have
Instead of paying estimates, they have that additional withholding.
Stephanie
we have a phone
Koenig?
call.
Stephanie Koenig, is that for you?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm gonna let it go.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. People watching this, we're using my cell phone, which is so I get like a lot of calls. We couldn't hook up Mike's phone in time for the show. Sorry about that.
Okay. So anyway, yes, I have had that one in the past, and just like I said, requires a letter from the employer, and there's a lot of other reasons that you would have to do that. A lot of times without a state and things like that. So.
Correct.
Code 730, request for detailed travel logs to support Schedule U emails. I'm actually surprised this isn't higher.
Yes.
Well, it may have been higher in a prior year, but in this particular year, we've started. Maybe we just haven't gotten to those returns yet. So, if a taxpayer claims Schedule UE expenses, that's unreimbursed business expenses, and they have an occupation that maybe doesn't always fit into a category where the department has seen travel expenses being claimed, we want to make sure that they're not commuting miles. So that's why we're asking for the travel log.
Right.
The fact that they are going out to clients, so they're required to make or to do the travel, to make sure the expense is an allowable expense.
Well,
And there are differences between
the federal and the state.
The federal and the state, between the types of miles that are allowed. For example, for the federal, they did allow miles between jobs, and
Yes.
the state does not allow that.
And also the reimbursement that you receive, if it's not the allowed amount by the federal government, but it's something less, you can't deduct the difference.
For Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Correct.
That is correct on both counts, Mike and Dennis.
Right.
We find that a lot of people aren't aware of that second item that Dennis was mentioning, that you can, for federal income tax purposes, you could claim that difference. Beginning in 2018, that expense went away for federal income tax purposes, but we still allow it for Pennsylvania. But you're still not allowed to claim that differential between the Fed rate and the actual reimbursement rate that the employer provides.
Correct. And it is a reason, again, for people to keep detailed travel logs,
Yes.
which I know there are people that do not do that.
It's one of my goals to eventually develop a similar type of form that the IRS has for travel expenses, for keeping track of them. Don't
Okay.
know if I'll ever get that before I retire, but hopefully at some point.
Well, I know I keep track of my miles through an app on the phone that keeps track of every place I drive. And I can tell whether it's business or not, and business or personal, and I can make notes on each trip as to what it actually was. So
Amazing what our phones will do these days.
yeah, I mean, and there's also, I can also set it like I have a networking group that I go to every week. It will automatically call that business. So the app works really well. That app, the one I'm using, is called Mile IQ, but I know there are other apps out there available.
Well, also with the federal, you're allowed $1,500 with no documentation for the house and the deductions, but Pennsylvania doesn't recognize that because it has to be actual expenses.
Correct.
Correct.
Our requirements for Schedule UE expenses are that they must be ordinary, necessary, reasonable, directly related, and actually incurred.
Right. Right. And There are, as we said, there are many differences between the two.
Yes.
Quite a few.
Yes, and we, even though a lot of people, a lot of clients, because of new federal regulations, are not filing 2106 because you can't take it anymore as an itemized deduction.
Now tell them what Form 2106 is for our listeners.
2106 is the federal form for employee business expenses, which is also a form that partners in a partnership can use to deduct their expenses on the K-1.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's a lot more complicated.
But that's more complicated and got to go through the partnership rules for that. But we're still working with clients doing the UE because it is still deductible for Pennsylvania.
Yes, but we did see a significant reduction in the number of returns that included Schedule UE this year.
Well, that's because employees receiving a W-2 could no longer deduct that expense on Schedule A, so they ignored it.
Correct.
Without realizing they could deduct it on Pennsylvania.
Correct.
That is correct.
That is correct. I know the software we use still had all those deductions.
Benefit ratio too. I mean, if it's going to cost them more to pay for their tax professional to complete that and summarize all of those expenses, as opposed to what they're going to get in return as a refund or a reduction in taxes, they could have made a decision it just wasn't worth it for them to do that anymore.
Yes. I know our software still left those deductions in, those 2% deductions, for state purposes, because there's a lot of states that do allow some of those deductions. So there are a lot of states that allow those deductions, and those Pennsylvania with the UE is one of them, so we still worked on those, at least in our office. Okay, so we'll go to the next code, which is code 887, and code 887 is a request, as we talked about before, for W-2s and 1099s, not 1099-Rs, 1099s that may have withholding on them.
Yes. But there was another thing on W-2s that they do, the state does want to know about. It's where there's a differential between the Medicare wages and the Pennsylvania taxable wages versus the federal taxable
Correct.
wages.
Yes. And in that situation, if the W-2 doesn't provide enough information to do that reconciliation between Medicare wages, federal wages, and PA wages, in those situations we ask for a schedule, which is called a W-2RW, a reconciliation worksheet that gives that information and can be included with the return.
Correct.
Should be included with the return in those situations.
Yes, and the problem is that a lot of W-2s don't give that breakdown.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that aren't typically there, and a lot of times that's Pennsylvania doesn't tax personal use of company auto, or if the individual is an owner of a S corporation, then if they have medical that's included in their federal wages, that for a 2% shareholder is not taxable for Pennsylvania purposes.
Correct. And
A lot of times that information is missing from a W-2.
My problem, David, is with these payroll companies and people or businesses that do their own payroll, they do it incorrectly, and they don't realize it.
Well, that's true. The problem is the complications of taxable wages
Yes.
is just absurd.
Yes. Well, it's a matter of entering the correct code.
Yeah.
There are a number of differences too between federal and Pennsylvania there
Correct.
that make it difficult.
Yes.
And our personal income tax guide for compensation does provide a lot of those differences, as well as our section on tax withholding and other credits.
Correct.
Correct.
I think I have that chapter wrong. Let me just give me a moment here and I'll find it.
Oh, okay.
I'll get that to you before the end of the show.
Okay. We'll go to the next code while we're doing that,
Okay.
which is code 858, which is request for authorization to offset a refund on a joint return for unpaid support or to request separate returns. This is similar to the Code 909, except this is specifically for support. Correct?
Yes, this is for unpaid support. Very similar code. And we do get a lot of requests there to offset refunds.
And
Again, we offer them the opportunity to file separate returns before we do any offsets.
yeah, and anybody that has those situations should be considering filing a separate return up front
Yes.
for that reason. Unless all the refund is because of their income. So,
What most people don't understand with Pennsylvania, when you file separate returns, there's no change in tax effect like it is with the federal with limitations. So
That is correct.
there's no disadvantage. What is a disadvantage if all the money, the taxes are withheld from one spouse, or one spouse makes the estimated taxes for both couples, then the other spouse may have a balance due, and the first spouse may get a big refund. And that's where they're talking about the offset.
right.
Correct. Yes,
Right.
we are an individual income tax state. Each individual is taxed on their own separate income and is calculated separately. A joint filing is only for administrative purposes.
So
Allow a joint filing.
individuals in this situation would be smart if they're paying estimated taxes for it to be paid under the other spouse's Social Security number.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
And there's a form for that too. They can submit an REV 459B, which is a consent to transfer or adjust estimated payment account.
Now, both spouses have to file that.
Yes.
yeah.
Both spouses would have to file that, and it would transfer the estimated payments from the primary taxpayer, person listed first, to the actual person who makes the estimated payments,
Okay.
or to the other spouse to offset her income, the tax on her income.
Okay. And that's
I'm sorry, I'm being sexist here and not being inclusive on the spouse's income.
yeah. I was thinking we'd do that. I actually have several clients where the wife is listed first.
Yes.
So, okay, the next code is code 864. Request for other states' tax returns to support resident credit claims.
Yes, we have a number of those claims, and I'm always surprised by this because we always make a lot of requests for other states' returns. If a person works in Pennsylvania lives in Pennsylvania and works in another state that's not a reciprocal state like Delaware or New York, or even works further out, maybe they work they file a tax return in that other state, they can get a credit for those taxes that are paid to the other state. But in order to get a credit in Pennsylvania, a copy of that other state's tax return must be included with the return and the Schedule GL.
Okay. David, there's one thing that you said. It's taxes paid in the other state. That's not the amount that's withheld. That's the actual amount that's due on the other state return. So if you have more withheld for the foreign state and then you get a refund on the return, you can only deduct the actual tax that was due for that year and not the amount withheld.
Up to the amount of the Pennsylvania tax.
Yeah, right.
So if that state is more than Pennsylvania,
You get a credit for the actual tax paid in Pennsylvania, the lesser of the tax paid for Pennsylvania for that income, or the other state's tax as calculated on that income.
Correct, which most people don't understand.
It's not necessarily the withholding. Yes.
Correct. So that when you do request that foreign state form, it's no big deal. It's just that you want to verify the correct amount that should be refunded.
Yes.
Correct.
We want to verify that we're using the tax liability and not the tax withholding or the tax that was paid in on their behalf by the employer. We want to make sure we have the calculated tax liability.
and that's why you need a copy of the other state's return to see what that liability actually is.
Correct.
Yes.
Because the W-2 does not show that.
Correct. Now that's why you need a tax preparer to do your returns, because of all these differences.
And if you don't file the other state's return, you're not entitled to the credit, correct?
That's correct.
So you actually, even if you don't owe anything or get a refund, you have to file the other state return. Okay. That brings us to code 824. Request for employer letters requiring work clothes as a condition of continued employment and an explanation of how they're not adaptable to general use.
That question or that request for information results from, we get a lot of requests or a lot of tax returns that people show cleaning of uniforms and other clothing that could be used for other things. They might claim that they have to have a suit for work. That isn't necessarily required as a condition of employment, and a suit could also be used for other purposes, whether it's a business suit for a woman or a business suit for a man. We just want to make sure, based upon their job description and their position with that particular employer, that they have to have a uniform in order to perform their position.
Well,
the duties of their position.
The terminology not adaptable to general use. You know, people in hospitals wear scrubs, and they can go out in them, and some do.
Yeah, but they're generally not going to wear them. You're not going to wear scrubs socially. I would say that's not adaptable to general use. I would think...
Until it becomes fashionable to do so, which...
Right, yeah.
It's not necessarily something that the department's looking for.
Right.
In that situation, if it's a scrub for a nurse.
Right.
We don't generally ask. It's because of their position. They might be an office worker, and they're claiming that they have to have a business suit, or they have to have their shirts cleaned.
Yeah, but
those situations are typically, we're looking at a couple of different things there. When we ask for that information, it's based upon the job description that they provided and the duties of that position.
And generally, the federal rules follow those.
Yes.
Yes.
Or vice versa.
Correct. It can only, it can't be used for general use.
Right.
So, a suit or a sport jacket or a dress, for that matter, can be used any place.
Correct.
But that's why a lot of places will put their logo on the jacket, the suit, or the dress. I know with those, I have not had issues with the federal government. What's Pennsylvania's stance on that?
Well, that's because you write it off as advertising and promotion.
No, I don't. No, it's work clothes and uniforms.
Well, if they're required to buy that jacket and they're required by their employer would say that it was a condition of their continued employment.
Correct.
So in that situation, we would allow it.
Okay, that's what I thought. So those rules pretty much follow the federal rules.
Yes.
And but not a lot of people are taking work clothes anymore.
No.
So
We've become more of a service economy as opposed to a manufacturing economy.
well, it's also people aren't requiring uniforms so much as anymore. They're letting people wear what they want. So and casual has become more adaptable to most employee environments. And the last request for information is code 904, or the last top 10, which is requests for photocopies of receipts for small tool purchases and a letter from employer stating the tools are required as a condition of the employment. And that could be for people that work for contractors, auto repair shops, that they have to buy certain equipment that is not supplied to them.
We find there are a lot of auto mechanics that work for dealerships. The dealership offers them the opportunity for employment, but a lot of times those employment opportunities come with the condition that if they want special tools to do their job, they have to provide their own tools.
Correct.
And one of the things that does for that person then is that person now has their own tools, and when they leave that particular employment job, they can start their own shop a lot easier.
Correct. And again, that's close to the federal rules too, the same as the
Yes.
federal rules. But those,
Again, we need that it's a condition of employment. They have
Would
that.
you require a letter from the employer?
Yes.
yeah. So all of these notices will come with the understanding your notice information available at the online customer service center, where if you go to the online service center at www.revenuepa.gov and click on online services from the menu at the top of the home page, you can also pull that up. And you can look at the frequently asked questions on there. And there's also a spot. Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
There's also a spot where they can put the code in, and it will.
Yes, there's a blank space at the top. If they would just type 902 or 904 in there, they will get as one of those frequently asked questions. Here's what the department's looking for. Here's what you need to provide to respond to the notice. And it gives it in a plain language format. Many of our other codes for requests for information have these same questions or frequently asked questions available to them. It's not just these top 10.
Correct.
There are many others as well. You can also, at that same location, if you had a question about personal income taxes, we could provide answers there as well. And many tax professionals use that, as well as taxpayers use that online customer service center, frequently asked questions section to get answers to questions that they may have when they're preparing tax returns.
And our office goes to that from time to time too, for that information.
It's not just personal income tax that's available there. It's sales tax, corporate net income tax, motor fuels taxes. They're all available there.
Yeah, well, there's a drop-down window that you can select the type of tax it is and then go from there.
So it's a good source for almost any kind of tax.
Yes.
Okay.
And if it's not there, you can enter a question, and tax professionals should be able to get a response within 2 business days.
Typically, that's what I do, because the questions that I have a dynamic to it that it doesn't fall into the general rule. And you have to ask the specific question.
Okay. So again, for those of you on watching us on YouTube, here is a copy of a letter showing where on the top right the code would be next to the tax year and the date of the notice.
Keep in mind, this is not an audit. It's just a review of your tax filing that they need some clarification.
Correct.
And it would not necessarily lead to a tax liability unless the information you entered on the return was not correct.
Correct. And they're just asking you to back up what you reported on the return. That's all they're asking for, is additional information. And also, if you look at the notice, there's a call-in notice number here. There's an email is right on the notice in the middle. And right below the email is also the fax number. So all that information on being able to get in touch with someone regarding this information is right in with the notice. And these are the adjustments that the top 10s for actual adjustments to returns. I assume these are after the notices, or if someone has not replied to the notice?
They could be, yes, but they're also, when we review a return initially, they could have been prepared incorrectly. Most likely it's because they picked up the wrong number from someplace.
And one thing, because we're down to our last minute here, I want to note is this code 209, estimated tax payments less than estimated payments made, so they were increased or also could be decreased. For anyone that wants to find out what their estimated tax payment credits are, they could call 1-888 PA Taxes. They need their Social Security number, the tax year they're calling about, and the amount of tax paid. And that will tell them what their estimated payments that they've been credited for. It will also give them date paid. So it's a very good source for information. And with that, David, I want to thank you for being on the show and going through these and informing people as to these errors and how they can get them adjusted. So thank you. And to everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.